Very good morning, students. So today we are going to revise chapter The Address. So let me just give you a quick revision of the chapter. So this is a story of a girl. She is a victim of war and she has come to an address which was once asked by her mother to remember and visit one day after the war was over. So she came at that address to fulfill the promise that she had once made to her mother, and she rang the doorbell. The owner of the house, when she came out, we see that she refused to identify her. She looked at the narrator searchingly in an inquiring manner. She did not even open the door full to welcome the girl. The girl introduced herself as Mrs. S.'s daughter, but still there was no sign of recognition on the face of the lady. She kept on staring at the girl who was standing in front of her door, and for a moment the narrator said that she thought that she was mistaken. She might have come to the wrong address and had rung the wrong bell. But then suddenly the woman, she came out, she stepped outside, she let the door go open and she stepped forward. The narrator observed that she was wearing her mother's cardigan, which was green in color. It was a knitted cardigan. There were wooden buttons on it and they had, we can say, faded because of overwashing. The girl, she identified easily that it was her mother's cardigan. And the lady, she also observed that the girl was looking at her. And she had to accept then that she had recognized her. At that time, the girl, she again asked that if she knew her mother. The woman, she accepted and said that yes, she had recognized her, and she asked if she had come back. The girl said that only she had come back, her mother she had not. And she said, only me. Here we see that the lady, she gave a very cold reception to our narrator. The narrator felt somewhere that from the inside a door opened and closed and a very muggy smell emerged out of the room. And the lady said that she could not attend her at the moment. She couldn't do anything for her at the moment. The narrator insisted that she had come specially on train to meet her, to talk to her. But we see that the owner, who is Mrs. Darling, she said that it was not convenient for her to talk to the girl at that moment. It was a very cold reception that the girl received. She was disappointed by meeting the owner. The lady, we all know that her name is Mrs. Darling. Now, why did the lady refuse to recognize her and did not welcome her? Now, we know that the reason was that she understood that the girl, she had come back to claim for the belongings which were given to Mrs. Darling once before the war. We see that how Mrs. Darling, she proved to be a lady who is very greedy in nature. She did not want to part with the things and she refused to identify her. And when she identified her, she accepted that she knew her mother as well. She did not let her inside her room and she asked her to come some other time. She nodded and she closed the door, and the narrator, she stood there on the doorstep disappointed. She looked at the number plate again. The name was there on the jamb of the door. The number plate was of Mrs. Darling, number 46, Marconi Street. The narrator, she started moving back to the railway station, and there we see that how she had the flashback of memories. And she remembered that it was the first half of the war and she had come for a few days to her home and she observed that a lot of things were missing from her house. The mother was quite shocked that her daughter would recognize things so quickly. And then she told her daughter about Mrs. Darling. The narrator said that she had never heard of Mrs. Darling before, and it proved to be that she was one of the acquaintance of Mrs. Darling. Sorry, her mother, her friend, one of her friends of her mother, and she hadn't seen her mother for years, but now recently she had renewed the contact and started visiting them regularly. The mother told her daughter that she had started visiting them frequently, and whenever she would leave from there, she would take something or the other with them. And this way she had taken all the silver cutlery, the antique plates, the large vases from there. Mrs. S., that is the narrator's mother, she also showed her concern towards Mrs. Darling that she might have got a crick in her back while carrying those heavy things. And she shook her head pityingly. And the mother also told her daughter that she would have never dared to ask her for this. She also informed her daughter that the suggestion, it came from Mrs. Darling. She informed her daughter that how she convinced her that she would keep all her things, valuable possessions in her safe custody, and whenever they would return, she would hand over them all to them. And now see here, we come to know about Mrs. S.'s behavior, that how simple-hearted she was. She was very credulous in nature. She easily believed Mrs. Darling. After reading the chapter, we have a clear understanding of Darling's character. We have found her to be a very dishonest lady. And Mrs. S., a very simple lady who was so credulous that she could not understand the manipulations made by Mrs. Darling. She failed to see all those schemings and plannings of Mrs. Darling, and she trusted Mrs. Darling. We also feel that how the mother, narrator's mother, she was under the pressure. She was also living in threat of being robbed or being murdered. The life of the Jews in Holland was at stake. It was under danger because the Nazis, they could attack the families any time. And that is why Mrs. Darling, she was easily able to convince Mrs. S., and she took all her precious belongings to her house. So here on one side we see that Mrs. Darling easily convinced Mrs. S., but on the other side Mrs. S. failed to convince her daughter. The daughter asked her mother if she had agreed with her that she should keep all the things safely in her custody. She asked her mother about the agreement, any contract that she had made. Now see, there was no danger to Mrs. Darling's life, but as Mrs. S., she belonged to Jew community, their life was in danger. And that is why she was ready to hand over everything to Mrs. Darling as she trusted her deeply. So the mother became angry when the daughter asked her about the agreement. As if that's necessary, she cried. And she also told her daughter that it would be an insult if she had asked her about this agreement. She said that think about the risk that she was taking every time she was going out of their house, taking a heavy suitcase along. The narrator, the daughter of Mrs. S., she found that she understood that there was no point in discussing about this with her mother. She was angry at her own daughter and she did not speak any further about this thing. The narrator said that meanwhile she had arrived at the station, and without having paid much attention to the things that were on the way. She was in her familiar surroundings where she had spent her childhood days, and she did not dare to look at those things because she knew that those things were definitely going to upset her. It was from the past, the memories that belonged to her past had some good memories, the golden memories, and also the painful memories. The trauma that she had undergone during the war it would bring back all those things again. And that's why she avoided looking at the things, the sights of the streets, the houses, the parks, etc. And she said that when she was seated in the train, she saw Mrs. Darling's face again. She remembered the first time she had seen Mrs. Darling. It was the morning time and she was coming downstairs from her room. She got up very late that morning and she saw that her mother was about to see someone out. Someone was standing at the door who was about to leave from their house, and she saw that there was a lady with a broad bag. "There's my daughter," said Mrs. S. She called her daughter by making a gesture, and the woman nodded. Then she picked up the suitcase and left their house. She was wearing a brown coat and a shapeless hat. And it was then that Mrs. S. she told her daughter that she is Mrs. Darling and she lives in Marconi Street, house number 46. And she asked her daughter to remember this address. The narrator said that yes, she had remembered it, but she had waited for a long time to go there. It was not easy for this girl to overcome the trauma that she had undergone, because she had lived her life like a refugee in some other country. She lived under threat every day, and during the war she also lost her mother. She was left alone. It was a very painful journey for the narrator there. So it was not easy for her to come back to the address immediately after the war. The freedom was there, liberation was there, war was over, but at that time she was not at all interested in the things that once belonged to her mother. And the things were lying under the custody of Mrs. Darling, packed in the suitcases and boxes, waiting for the narrator to come there and put them back on the cupboards again. They had to endure for all these years just because they were things. The narrator was also very well aware that those things were precious to her because those things had connection with her mother. But her mother was long dead. So gradually when things started to become normal, and it was easy for the narrator as well to earn her livelihood. She had a room of her own now. She lived in a rented house. She could sleep unthreateningly there in her house. And it was then that she found herself curious to see all those things that once belonged to her mother. She wanted to see them. She wanted to touch them and remember her childhood days back again. But the first visit was quite disappointing one. She came to the door, but she could not claim for her things. She felt cheated at the hands of Mrs. Darling. She knew that Mrs. Darling had all the things kept in her house, but she did not even let her inside her house. She didn't welcome her. The cold reception that she had received, it actually made her sad and depressed. She felt cheated there. So students, I hope up to this part of the story it is clear to you all. We will continue this story in the next class, I hope. So read the story again. We will discuss the question after we finish doing the recap of the story, okay? Thank you.